Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming tonight. First, I'd like to begin by thanking the ASL program and Department of Linguistics for making this event possible. This event is being co-sponsored by the Wolf Humanities Center. They've also made all the presentations in this year's lecture series, ASL Interpreted, in order to ensure access to all deaf community members. So I wanted to take this opportunity to thank them publicly for their support. Also, I'd like to thank the Deaf Hearing Communication Center for its ongoing support and collaborations, including this one tonight. And lastly, thank you to our interpreters. We couldn't have events like this without them. This evening, I'm happy to have here with us Dr. Jon Henner. He is an assistant professor at University of North Carolina, Greensboro. He has written on various topics related to deaf education and deaf people, including analogical reasoning skills in deaf children, developing sign language measurements for deaf and hard of hearing children, and on social justice issues related to deaf communities. His current research interests center on measurement and assessment of deaf children, adults, and second language learners of signed languages, test development for signed languages, research methodologies with deaf people, and studying how different background characteristics impact acquisition of American Sign Language skills and related skills in deaf children. So tonight, our topic is Variability is the Spice of Life. Now, please help me welcome Dr. Jon Henner.
Thank you, Jamie. So I would like to thank you for having me here. I've been very excited about, you may not be as excited as I am, but I'm excited to be here. I always start by showing my agenda. And so, we will have an introduction. We'll talk a little bit, there's going to be a little bit of a math lesson. I apologize for this, but there will be math. And then I'm going to talk about who gets to be normal. And I know I'm not, but anyway, you out there, we'll see. And then we are going to apply the math to this idea of normal and where does sign languages fit into all of this. Mm-hmm. And then finally, we're going to find out where does this fall in with normal ASL in the deaf community and so forth. And a while ago, I was talking about this lecture, and Jamie said, please, please, please also talk about allies. So I added this to my lecture, this lecture I've given before, but I've added a little part about allies at the end. And you will, by then you'll be kind of tired of me, and then we'll be done. Okay? So, by way of introduction, as Jamie explained, I am Dr. Jon Henner. I don't teach American Sign Language. I am a linguist. Everyone thinks that I teach ASL, but I don't. I sit in my office, and students will email me, and they'll go, Jon, what's up? And I'll think, and who are you? They'll go, yeah, I'm a student. I wanted to meet you, Jon. And I'm like, my name is Dr. Henner. And they said, I thought deaf culture meant you could use your first name. And I said, you can hear. You're not part of deaf culture. Right? Mm-hmm. And that's how most of my students encounter me. Obviously, it requires some time before my students stop being afraid of me after that beginning. Yes, I am Jon. I do not teach American Sign Language. Part of it is for a political reason. Partly because a hearing person sees a deaf person at a university and they automatically accept that the only reason I'm there is to teach American Sign Language. But I don't. I have met people who the first thing they ask me is if I teach sign language. So I said, I stopped doing it and I won't do it. And they go like, how do you sign this, this, and this? And I'll say, I don't know. All deaf people do enjoy, things. I mean, I'm not. Oh, apparently deaf people know that I'm not, people know that I'm not a nice person. Other people are nice. I am not a nice person. So for many years, I have been teaching not American Sign Language, but I find that people do like to start with games. And so I am opening with a game, and the game is truth or myth. I will show you a slide, and then I will say, is this true? And you raise your hand. Raise your left hand when you raise it if it's true. So I want this hand, your left hand on your left, raised if it's true. And on my arm, it's the one with very few tattoos. That's how I know it's my left hand and my left arm. And that's why I have no tattoos or very few tattoos on that arm, so I can tell my right from my left. Okay. Anyway, if it's a myth or if it's false, raise your right hand, which on me is the one with the tattoos. And if you don't have tattoos to tell apart, I don't know, I'm sorry for you. Okay. You ready? Here we go. True. The trues, raise your hand. Left hand. This is not a quiz. I'm not going to correct you. Don't get all anxious on me. Raise your hand if you think this is true. Who thinks it's false? Okay, you ready? It is false. All languages are conceptual. Hello? When people say conceptual, they typically think iconic. There's a difference. Okay, that's the warm-up. Okay, so now you ready? True. Trues, raise your hand. Falses, raise your hand. All right, very good. Spoken languages do have classifiers. Well done. Okay, number 3. It means that all spoken languages are unimodal, right? So that's, okay, so all people who think this is true, please raise your left hand. The people who think it's false, raise your right hand. Right. Okay, so all spoken languages, some spoken languages also have gesture systems. Many people think spoken languages are just about the mouth. That's not true. Sometimes if you don't gesture, the message could be totally skewed. So a lot of spoken languages do depend on appropriate gesture systems. Who thinks this is true? Who thinks it's false? All right. It is the trues, raise your hand. From this one. Falses. I missed the chain. Okay, good. You are all very smart. Everybody gets A's. Nice to meet you all. See you later. Okay, all right, fine. All right, we'll go on with a couple other things.
Now today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about variability and how that affects marginalization. Now, of course, people are diverse. That's something you already know. Not everyone's the same. However, we have created a system that punishes people for being outside a version of normal. There are schools that specialize in standardization. And if you deviate from that standard and from that norm, for example, if you are a deaf person, you experience additional punishment. So before I talk about variability, first we have to understand some mathematical concepts. Unfortunately, for all of you who aren't into math, you're not going to be feeling so good about this section of my talk. However, I'm going to go into variability before talking about assessment. So often we'll use statistics to talk about mathematical and financial concepts, and that's really at the foundation of where we're going. So I'm going to give you a short math lesson before I continue the rest of my presentation. Who recognizes this formula? What is this? Anyone? This is the formula for standard deviation. This is a formula in which it's one of the most important assessment tools used in school and probably does a lot of damage since its inception. Now, of course, the formula doesn't want to take responsibility. It just demonstrates variability, but how we interpret those results, it's that interpretation that ends the neutrality of the formula. So I'm going to walk you through this and talk to you a little bit about standard deviation. Before we can parse out our variability, we first need to calculate how much variability we have. And that is part of our formula, as you see above. So in the numerator of the fraction, this is how we calculate our variability. The formal name is the sum of squares. And after we compute our sum of squares, we take the square root of the formula to find our mean. Our mean is basically we take a sample of different numbers, we select at random, we do our calculations to solve for our mean. First, we calculate the mean. And the mean has extreme significance. You do not want to deviate from that mean. But all of the numbers in our sample vary, and they're all based in comparison on that mean. So we start with random numbers, which are pretty cool. We have our ideal numbers, and anything that deviates from that in any way, no, we look at rather we look at the deviation from that mean. So here's what it comes out to. 7 is deviated by 2. 1 has a deviation of 3. 3 is a deviation of 2. 6 has a deviation of 1, and so on and so forth. You have all these deviations. We then square the formula because square means it's easier for us to work with. So we result with a number of 22, which is the sum of our variability. However, we have all this space between the number 5 and the number 22. We have this big stretch of variability. So what we do next is we try to fudge the numbers a little bit and clean them up to a way we like them. We want to find the average variability of each of each person. For example, when you're baking a cake and you pour the batter into a pan and you're ready to frost your cake, you want to make sure that you have a level surface to work with. You glom that frosting on the top of your cake and you start to even it out so that it's uniform around your cake. And that's part of what we do with our formula. We're smoothing out our frosting. We're taking that 22 and we are, and each person will have their own variability of 3.6. After which we take the square root and we end up with 1.89. So why am I teaching you about standard deviations? Remember, each person has a unique value. And then you measure them by how much they deviate from the standard. So now we've fudged our numbers and we've smoothed out our cake frosting through people to figure out what our curve is. And then who gets to be normal. This is our normal distribution. And there are many different types of distributions. This one, of course, is the most popular. I'm sure many of you recognize the bell curve. We don't like that name. It's called a normal distribution. 68% of your sample fall within the first standard deviation. Now remember we had that number 5 from our formula previously. 68% of people will fit into that red area of standard deviation from the mean. Then we have our next standard deviation. So when you add the entire curve, it comes up to 98 point something. However, you have this next area of standard deviation until the entire thing equals 100%. And this is our normal, this is our concept of normal, a normal distribution. So any test that you take, you see this. When you measure your weight, you're using standard deviation and the normal curve. When you're measuring size, again, we use this formula. With what clothes you buy, it's here as well. That formula calculates everything. And we use those numbers to apply to us. And some things can be numerical. But then what happens when you try to numerize things that should not be? Or quantify things that should not be? So that's the content of our discussion today. Is that a real word? It is now. Okay, good. Where do each one of us fit in the realm of normal? I now want you to think about the most normal person in the world. Just close your eyes and think about it. Get a picture in your minds. Are you ready? Does everyone have their image ready? I'm not collecting your sample. Most of you would not have had this image in your mind. National Geographic did a survey and found the most average person in the world would look like this. And it's based on calculations that they did. A 28-year-old Han, who is Chinese. Now, that makes sense when you think about the population size that lives in that area of the world. And my gut tells me, and through instinct and experience, most picture will imagine someone who is actually white. That then becomes your template for normal. And if that's the template you're using, a white person, that then could cause issues. For example, in this country, engineers tried to decipher what a normal person was when they were writing their code. They had to think of what is a normal person. And if a normal person is not considered within our standard deviation, then the technology will not work. This was a famous image that went across social media, which created problems with image technology. When cameras were invented, back in their inception, how did they calibrate white balance? They had a picture of a white female, and then all of the subsequent measurements were based upon that image. So if you did not look like this woman, you did not have the same skin color, then photography would wash you out, or your image would not be able to be seen. Because we don't make adjustments in our technology for that. We make one size that does not fit all. And then all of these years later, you see that issues still ensue in the realm of photography. Because we become so ingrained in one way, when they were trying to come up with these technologies for self-driving automobiles, it's using the same type of technology. So that's one way how normal throws a kink in the works and can cause oppression and marginalization. And who's to say that AI technology is non-biased? It's bullshit. Because you can see it right here. It has bias.
Consider these. When the engineers were calibrating airbags, you know, they were taking in account a person who's 5'9" and weighs 200 pounds, usually male. Everything was designed so that I should survive. I'm sorry, I will survive, the rest of you probably won't. But, you know, and we found out, you know, what they found was that people who were shorter or thinner, which typically women, but they didn't know that till later, they would not survive. Because of the way the angle of impact, it would go, of the airbag would go in their chin and it could break their neck. The people who designed it were thinking of a particular concept of normal. It was basically a normal-sized guy. And the assumption was that all people were the same, meant that many women had issues with medication as well. It goes into medical realm as well. And so they assume, you know, men's bodies and, you know, are the norm, but that's not necessarily true. We're not all the same. Women are more likely to have adverse reactions with drugs, and they can't really, there's nothing to be done. The research isn't there. Sorry to tell you that. The assumption is that men is the norm, and that's the end. They didn't feel like they needed to go into it anymore. Everything goes back to our standard deviation. And where are you on that curve? We can quantify it, and we can help us understanding things, but each person is not the same size, right? One size does not fit all. And when you adjust where the mean lies, then you can have different variabilities or different quantifications. So where the mean is, we need to move the mean for women. No, I'm sorry.
It centers on white men. It centers on white men.
Right now, where the standard is on white women. I just asked him. Okay. With medication, the mean has gone on white women. With medication, it's staying on white men. Sorry, guys. So we're staying, white men are the mean at this point in medication. Anyone who is not in that mean is going to have challenges or is not within that bit. Now, where does disability fit in? Remember, we have that mean, it's right there, and we make that mean make assumptions about individuals. So we start with assumption number 1, that a person can hear, that a person can see, that a person can walk, that a person has normal, happy, more normal emotional curves or whatever, is stable, is not in pain. We assume X, Y, and Z in addition to that. And that is our ideal norm. And if you deviate from that in any either the system doesn't know what to do with you, and so we stick you in some other room or hospital, and just get rid of you, or we try to fix you. In the old days, there were laws that if you had a physical disability that was not welcome, you were not allowed to walk out on the street. We call them the ugly laws. If you were deaf, you could sort of pass, but you weren't allowed to sign in public. So, a disability. What are our assumptions? Disability is not always permanent. I notice many people, there are a lot of folks in wheelchairs. They may have temporary disabilities. I'm sure that, you've got folks around, here, and I know that many places on campus are not designed for people with disabilities on this campus. Many of us resist that. We're, in the resistance about that. For many years, deaf people would not get involved with the disability movement. And now there's talk that that's changing because deaf people do accept that part of the political reality, they accept that they are part of the marginalized people, and now there's more discussion about getting involved with that. Because disability is something that we just don't expect. Our bodies and minds don't fit with what we are supposed to look like if we are disabled. And we might not accept other labels, like special needs, all that. Oh, come on. We all have special needs. We all your needs are special, my needs are special. Sometimes you need double specials. We're all able. All of us, all of our abilities are different. Some of us we all have different abilities, so there's a political reason for the labels. And we want to lift off those labels. So, where do the definitions come from? So, anytime you are with a scholar, you're going to have 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 different perspectives, and that's okay. If you don't have a discussion, then, that's not good. So, some things, however, should not be discussed. If there is a discussion, it will marginalize that person. Or if the discussion marginalizes that person, or for example, if a person is trans, we're not going to talk about that. Or, okay, some things we need to talk about, like these things up here. Medical theories want to fix people. How we label people. Laws want to change how we label people. Some people are in pain. That's not really a disability. I don't know, where's the line? Some disabilities are not worth talking about. Some things cause the disability. Some, whether it's physical or mental. There's the critical crip theories, that people resist, that there's, political rights and actions and the labels and activism. There's different ways that we can label these. Remember if we go back to our normal distribution and our mean and where it's placed and where it's shifts, there are gender issues and race issues. They intersect. Disability is what we call a multiplier when it comes to those. And if you already are an oppressed group, such as female or a person of color, and a person of color who's also a woman, a disability will be the multiplier on your oppression. You can't just take those apart. You can't disengage them. I want to talk, recently I was talking with a student who, recently a college bought the very recent scandal where rich people bought a kid's college place, right? Those kids wouldn't be there, these kids. These are more likely to be labeled with learning disabilities, because the people who evaluate those kids, have an assumption, and then they interpret the behavior of the children. The interpretation is based on a certain lens where that child fits or doesn't fit. We we were talking about integration, we've talked inclusion, and the deaf perspective is we should not use inclusion. Most people with disabilities want inclusion. They want to be in the regular classroom, and we understand that deaf people are a different story, and that's a long, long, long discussion where deaf people fit in. If a person has a disability, we are more likely to be included if children are white. If children of color with disabilities typically are segregated. And the teachers have less training, and less money, less things, less resources, and are more punitive. And where this is what I would call, we have a new segregation happening. We envision autism as a boy thing or a masculine issue. And the numbers are very much the numbers of boys with autism do outnumber the girls. And we find out that we really haven't labeled girls with autism so much. You know, we really haven't faced it because their behavior, you know, we see boys who have this behavior and, you know, something seems to be wrong with this boy, whereas a girl with the same behavior, or they're quiet, or they're lonely, or they're loners, is something we expect of girls. But everything goes back to, again, the evaluator and his or her particular lens. So, all of this talk is stuff we know, you know, about the world, you know, but where does language fit in with all of this? Think about your English skills. Who decides what proper English is? Oh, I have a better question. Where will you find the most English spoken, or the most proper English spoken? Where do the most people speak English? In America? Where? Okay, who thinks it's America? That's where most English is. How about Canada, America, England? Okay, we got that. Okay, what about China? Actually, the answer is China, where the most English is spoken. China and India have more English speakers than America, Canada, and England combined. So, who owns English? And how many kinds of English do you think are spoken in the United States? At least, you know, a lot. Okay, so when we talk about standard English is used to marginalize and actually oppress people, really keep them down. If your English is stellar, your English is not stellar, you must be an idiot, not smart. We make judgments based on their accents, on the perfection of their English. Again, whose English are we actually defending or promoting, and based on what? You know, I mean, understand, each one of us has our own language, meaning the number of English is varied, you know, and as varied as the number of people in the room. So, we all have our idiolect, and then the community shares that idiolect, and we have common understanding. Then we have regional dialects from that, and then we have the social dialect. For some people who
African American vernacular English.
Thank you. The African American vernacular English is their dialect. And anytime you force someone to use language that is outside of their dialect, their mental process will be compromised. Typically, you learn better in your own dialect. All over the communities of Black students are being forced to use standard English, and they suffer for that. And this is something to think about. The question is, what is the difference between a dialect and language? The answer is always Army, military. Language is political. Okay, so now where does deafness fit in? Where disability and language intersect is where deafness is. And that's the target. We're sort of targeted with this. Deaf people's right at the crosshairs of that. of disability in language. A person who is deaf is doubly punished. First, they're punished or set aside or thought because they're less than because their ears are broken. And then we are doubly punished by our language. If you are deaf and female, if you are deaf and a person of color, if you are deaf and other things, the punishment intensifies. Now, going back to our standard deviation, where are deaf people in there? Okay, there are assumptions about the people that we meet every day. I see things like this. A lot. And anywhere, you go and there are deaf people in the room, there will be a story of some kind of thing like this. And abuse. I have been abused. Assaulted. I have been assaulted many times by people who think that I am ignoring them. Because the assumption is that I can hear. Because hearing is normal. Therefore, if you're not responding to me, you are ignoring me, because the assumption is that I act based on what I think is normal. Now, I need to let you know, hearing loss is way more common than you would expect. Don't take pictures of this. Just look at it.
Because it sucks.
Because this sucks, so don't take pictures of it, really. I do not like the language that this says, because for a lot of reasons. I got it from the World Health Organization, and I emailed them to complain about the language that is, and tell them what I think of them. So I don't like the language. Again, the expectation is normality or normal. And how we react to that expectation will cause the problem. But hearing loss causes nothing. However, except hearing loss. It's how we respond to hearing loss that causes, functional issues and emotional problems and economic impact. First of all, if you don't sign when you're a child, then your cognitive abilities are reduced. If you refuse to interact and bring the child into his community, then you will have social issues with that child. If you refuse to keep that child or as a person or treat them as a person, there will be emotional issues. If you refuse to hire a person with a hearing loss, there will be an economic impact. Again, hearing loss isn't causing that. It's how we respond to the hearing loss that causes all of the issues, that affects everything. We like to ignore a reaction. We just say, oh, well, it's the deaf person's fault. Think about hearing loss. There are some genetic components, and there are a lot of variables even within that. I love war because war causes deafness, right? You think about it. If you think about music, loud music, hey, I'll see you in 40 years if you like it. You'll be in my world. I wouldn't say our culture, I think it's a societal problem. Mm-hmm. We love talking. We love speaking. We are willing to eradicate a group of people by not signing, even though all hearing people gesture. They ignore the gestures. That brings us to modality and gesturing. It's really all about modality. that there are many different kinds of modalities. There's print, there's speaking, there's gesturing, signing. Modality is really just one way that we communicate. It's really only how we communicate. It's how we expect people to communicate that is ingrained in our education and in our training. When we talk about speech and language, you know, that's where we see it a lot. I mean, well, first of all, the speech is a modality. It has nothing to do with language, which is the other part. Speech and language, okay. When I meet speech and language pathologists, they say, I help deaf children learn language. I say, really? Do you actually help them learn language or just help them learn to talk? Because that ain't language. Language is in the brain. You can use language with pictures. You can develop language with manipulatives. You can develop language with art. You can develop language with signs. This is a cover of a book. When I graduated, they wanted me to teach children in child development. And I said, fine, what book do you use? When I got to University of North Carolina, Greensboro, this is the book they told me I had to use. And I threw that in the trash. Because the babies are not born to talk. Babies are born to develop language. If you don't understand that the human language can come in all varieties, then you will see signs as playful, as play only, like these things talk about. I see these from time to time. They're newspaper articles or some smart kids, you know, invented some new glove, right? That's supposed to get signing. Okay, where did he learn sign? Well, no, I looked in a book, he said. And so I was like, get rid of that one. My son, the son was a challenge. You know, he went to the library, the advertising baby sign, and I thought, great. I was bored. Let me take my kid over to this baby sign class. Let me meet the baby sign teacher. They were a certified language blah, blah, blah person. So there was a bunch of people in the room, and I was watching this person. And she says this. This was the word brown. That's how she signed brown. She's actually signing blue, be in the air, which is not brown, but she was mouthing brown. And so, I mean, this is a certified such and such baby sign person expert. It always works if you believe that signs really are, if it don't work, it only works if you believe that signs are not part of language or not their own language. You know, signing to deaf people because we're afraid that they won't talk. We were told not to sign to deaf babies because we were afraid they wouldn't develop speech. So if you have a baby and you say the baby's not normal and their language, maybe they, you know, that signing would not be normal. So here's what we do. So anytime you deviate from the mean, you got to fix them. And because our system can't handle things that are off of the mean or deviant from the mean. Like a boy in a dress. That's not the mean. Right there, we got it. Everything is manipulated by this curve, by the standard deviation. We have organized things, we've quantified things that should not be quantified. Like this one. We glorify the deaf person who is willing to open up and get fixed. And like we're all verklempt because like, oh my gosh, they're normal. and we, wipe away our tears. They're not deviant anymore. They won't have to learn sign language. Isn't that beautiful? So, all right, fine. I have a bad habit, I have to tell you, of sort of squashing down people. I think I destroy what I do. The world sucks. Everything is, dark. I'm sort of a pessimist. So, welcome to my frame. Okay, welcome to my world. That's fine. I am okay with the world being murky, and many folks are not. For you who must say we have to have a solution to this murkiness, here's what we can do. Something to remember. People are complicated. There will never be a simple solution. That people are not just deaf. They are not just female. They are not just gay. They're all those things in one. It makes their hearts beat. And maybe they're black and deaf and, I don't know, a multiple, maybe they think in a particular way, maybe they have a hard time thinking, maybe they can come up with solutions, but then there's another complication once you solve one problem. People who are deaf are not just deaf, so you can't take care of just the deaf part. People have a variety of intersections within them. There's really no ideal deaf person. There's no ideal deaf ASL. There's no ideal deaf social justice. There's no one way of doing things. There's no one way of signing. There's no one way of speaking English. There are multiple varied ways that people can be trans and gay and just lots of things. And deaf people have all of that too. We can't just envision deaf people as being homogeneous. That is not going to work. It means that there will be deaf people who you kind of look at and, like they'll look at you and say, Dr. Henner, you're full of it. I'm okay. And I accept that. I accept my being. It's part of my life. It's just part of who I am. You can just think that I'm full of it. But one thing allies can do is, like most hearing people I met are really bad listeners. They I work in the field for 30 years and I know deaf people, they'll say. And I go, okay, well, I'm a person who's deaf, and I've been deaf for 36 years. And I know a little more than you do. Oh, I'm a mom of, a deaf child or deaf children. Okay, so you know exactly one deaf child then, one deaf person. That doesn't count. I can't think of how many deaf people I've worked with or met. The first thing to do is zip it. Close your mouth and listen and open your eyes. Stop trying to talk over deaf people. That's the number one thing. And really, that's true for any oppressed group or marginalized community. This is the big one, the listen part. If you don't do that, you're just not going to make it.
You can't fix the small stuff until you change the system. You want to know how to fix things? This is how you fix things. And people say, but I want to fix things. Yeah, here you go. And if people keep trying to say, I want to no, this. Everything stems from this. Any questions? If anyone has any questions, please line up off to the side. We have interpreters as well if you need them, so thank you very much. Any questions? Hi, my name is Anthony. I don't know which way I should face.
Over here. Anthony, why don't you come over here?
And she'll copy you. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you for coming here to Penn. Society wants normalcy.
Oh, he's talking, wait, hold on. Communication timeout. Somebody needs to, either you need to go up there and be higher, or he thinks you should go back there and we'll copy some. Gotcha. I got it.
He's watching you.
Okay, wait, I'm confused.
Anthony's signing for the audience. You're going to sign for John.
Okay,
We're good.
take it away.
So society wants normalcy. How do you think we can help end society's desire for that normalcy? What can we do about that? What do you think? And what's the best way? Right, but how? How do we smash it?
Well, there you go. That is the question. To be honest with you, the best chance now is elections. Vote. That's the best thing you can do, is get out and vote.
Okay, thank you.
I mean,
Hi, thanks for giving your talk. So when you're talking about framing, that's great because I agree with you completely, especially as being a deaf person. I see these things every day throughout my life. And I really appreciate having allies. At the same time, we don't want help. We want to work together. That's the goal. Help is an old mindset that we used to have, that deaf people needed help, and that's not the case anymore. We don't think that way anymore. So I just wanted to put that out there.
it's like this.
Exactly.
They told me so many questions. Jamie said everybody was going to be asking questions, and there'd be so many.
Come on up.
What language?
Do you need an interpreter?
Oh, wait for the recording. Well, I don't really have a clear answer for you, because really the rules of the community are regional. So deaf space is important. And many deaf, regions, in regions, many people feel that the deaf space is getting smaller, and many programs tend to, bring in their students into this small deaf space, and they kind of take over. And I don't know, it's murky. Because there's something called, you can be afraid, not to just take over or It's hard to say. I don't know if in Philadelphia, I don't know Philadelphia well. So in the South, people typically get involved through church. Through church, they interact with the community there in that particular church. And obviously, damn it, I'm not kidding. I am a damn Yankee because I stayed there, I moved there. My region, my area is not the same because I came from the north. In Boston, where I lived, we typically interact with, positions of liberation, libation. Oh, we interact in establishments of libation, and hearing people interact with us. The important thing for us is that, it's our token hearing person might be there. That's kind of for Boston. That's what happens in the Boston area, and I think in other areas as well. I mean, you'd have to sort of find out. I'm not sure what it's like here in Philadelphia. And Jamie's saying, we have the deaf school here, and people sort of go there, but there are different communities depending on the age, so we don't have we have lots of communities in Philadelphia, so you kind of have to find yours. It may depend on, it depends on where you want to go or what you want to do. There's Deaf Awareness Day. There are sporting events where deaf people go. Places where you would expect to see hearing people show up, it's not our own space. You could interact there. And Kyle wants to add. I was mentioning.
Some of you may know me as, from some of the education classes here at University of Penn, you're in a position of power. You're in a privileged position to have that access. And in the future, you may become lawyers, medical professionals, business people, engineers. You have everything at your feet. And you have the reputation of being a graduate of Penn. So use that to your advantage. And our people in the community will benefit as well from your advocacy and your support in your careers by being mindful of how to include deaf and hard of hearing people in what you do in the future. That's the most important thing that you can do. But Dr. Henner is absolutely right. Things are murky, and it depends on where your locality is, the people and places that you're encountering. So it's really a big unknown variable. But as long as you're aware of it, you can figure it out somehow.
Thank you.
Sure. Other questions? Hi, everyone. My name is Elias, and I'm from New Jersey. I'm an ASL instructor. So my question for you is, when you were talking about, I don't know if you're familiar with Lead K. 7 states have passed the legislation. New Jersey will be doing it soon. If it gets passed, we will be the 8th state to do so. Lead K is inclusive of communication options, and one of them being ASL. So sometimes that type of choice is not good for deaf students. For deaf children, ASL is the best, and we want to do that first because we will get language access that way over spoken language. We can't get reading and writing skills from spoken language. We have to have language first in the form of sign language communication. So how can we convince others, particularly legislators, about that, to show them that other communication styles don't work for us other than sign language?
And my answer is, I don't know. Hearing people typically don't listen well. The data's there, and they don't seem to pay attention. They ignore it. I don't know how we can get them to understand and visualize that the options, right, you're talking about choice. You know, they're not saying choice, we have to provide the parents with equal choice. We have to give them the choice. That's the way the system looks. And in North Carolina, they use the language of choice a lot. Parents have their choices between spoken and sign language, which is fine. And parents pick speech in Chapel Hill. People explain to them about these agencies. They have thousands of speech pathologists and advocates and doctors and all that stuff, early intervention, blah, blah, blah. They get all the foundation, and it's a strong foundation, and they've got the folks there. The parents don't pick sign language unless the parents who do pick sign language get it from the internet. But where's their choice? Where is the real choice then? It's not a true choice. It's a systemically designed choice, which, they send the parents to specific places. And to be honest with you, it's for profit. People are making money off of this. Choice, lack of. And it's not really choice. The speech pathologists aren't doing it. The cochlear implant people aren't doing it. The audiologists, they're not going to offer the choice. That's the institution, or that's the way it works. It's that sign eats into their industry, and they don't like it. And that's the answer. I don't know, because, I haven't really figured out how to convince those people yet. On my own, I haven't been, I happen to be one of very few experts in assessment for children who are deaf. I do assessment, and I'm getting influenced by European signs. Anyway, the international signs stuck with me. So anyway, sorry about that. But assessment, I know how to do assessment. But it's impossible, I feel. Right? It seems impossible. And I've been studying for years and years, and it's like I know nothing, they think.
Hi, I'm an ASL student, and I wanted to ask you if you think hearing people learning ASL is similar to a cultural appropriation.
I have a complex answer for you. And it depends on what you do with the ASL. It's really what you do. So if you are starting to teach ASL, or if you take an ASL class and then you sell I love you merchandise, you have a little booth, and you push out deaf people and their businesses who might do that, and if hearing people start looking toward you and ignoring deaf people and deaf experts, then yes, it is cultural appropriation. If you are learning, and you're learning for your own enjoyment, fine, and your own appreciation of the language, that's not a problem. That's not appropriation.
Thank you.
Right now, okay, hold 1 second. Right now, there are speech pathologists who call themselves so-called language language learning first lab. That's what they have. I don't know if any of you have seen this. If you maybe have seen it on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. They're hearing speech pathologists who talk about language deprivation. And they're talking about that. And I recognized my research in their words, and I was furious because, they had sold, it's like they had sold language deprivation things, and I was really angry with that. That's cultural appropriation right there. And I think, deaf people wanted to share those things. I mean, deaf people typically look up to hearing people as experts because of that internal oppression that they experience, and it's internalized. And okay, yeah. Whose deaf culture are you talking about? Well, one second, but who? I'm sorry. I missed it. The interpreter missed it, so hold on one second. Whose deaf culture are we talking about? Oh, there we go, light. Thank you, Jamie. It's the same question. Whose deaf history? You know, who? I mean, I'm having a hard time answering because I'm not sure who. Okay, let me think. For many years, we've been trying to convince hearing people that we even have a culture. So we convinced them that we only had one culture. That's where it's sort of, so it becomes like, whose culture are you talking about? And then who would do that? America has so many cultures within it, right? We're a multicultural society. So America has many deaf cultures as well. We don't only have one deaf culture, and we only teach about one deaf culture. So, how many credits are you required to graduate? How many credits before you graduate do you have to? No, for your degree. 37 credits, and then you'll graduate? Oh, wow, that's not many. Okay, 37. And how many are core courses? How many credits in your core? Okay, so out of 37, 17 free credits is what you have left then, basically, right? Okay, so, I'm sorry. How many credits are in your major? $15. Okay, so that leaves 2, right? 40, your core, and then your major, and you got 2 left. And where are we going to put, a pre-class so that you could become aware before you took the class? Like, where would that go, I think it's a good idea. I'd be happy, if we had a class, maybe a board person in general. I'd like to think about logistics is what I like to think about. And then I like to sort of figure out where the deaf culture is and who they would be, where they would teach. And then that would be 3 classes. There would be white deaf history, black deaf history, Hispanic, Chicano deaf history, or Native American deaf history, deaf culture. So that's 4 cultures. And then there's, okay, other cultures, and then there's that would be a full semester for 1 credit. Now, you have to then take that before you take ASL 1. Is that what you're saying? You become aware of the cultures of deaf people before you even take an ASL class? Okay, they could be concurrent. So a credit for 1 semester. Wow. How many credits do you take per semester? 5. All right, so 2 of them, are eaten up by your deaf culture and your ASL class, right? So I think that, that'd be great, but would students really be willing to take this, to use up their 2 credits? Right, see, that's the thing. I think there's a barrier there, right? I think it's a great idea, I love the idea, but there's kind of a barrier when you have limited, when you've credit hours, you've limited credit hours. And so I don't think students are just going to take it first. I don't think they're just going to take it for, oh, Jamie has an idea. I want to add, so related to what she's saying and her perspective, what about integrating deaf history and diversity within the larger curriculum of the college. What about that? And so what about, or disability studies too? Instead of like seeing it as a separate entity that, deaf people are a part of the world, so why not include deaf history? We need to think about ways, and in this program, how we can incorporate deaf folks in the larger curriculum, right? Is that part of what we're talking about? So you have to think farther ahead before we take ASL. Maybe there's some things we need to know before we take ASL. So maybe that's one way to do it. Like, where has it been? Where has this been in your education? It hasn't been there, right? So you think maybe part of the problem is that we need to address things here. And this is where we try to see, that deaf people are not separate entity in the universe. They live, and they have been living, part of the world. Hearing and deaf people live in the same world. And so it's part of the problem really is where deaf people's story has been missing from the general history and the general curriculum, right? And so I teach PhD students, Dr. Henner saying, and many of them come from a variety of educational backgrounds, and they know nothing about U.S. history. Yes, they know about disability history. They know about IDA maybe, but when I talk about the 504, rehabilitation, no. The 504 protests, they don't know any, they never heard about those. We don't know that the disability community took over the federal buildings all over the United States. And they had the support of the black folks when they were doing it. I'm sorry, Black Panthers, that the Black Panthers were behind what they were doing, that they supported them. They took over federal buildings all over the country. People don't know that. Disabled people did that? Yes, they did, I say. It's part of our history. And then 20 years later, disabled people actually crawled up the steps of the federal buildings and Capitol building. They crawled up the steps of Capitol Hill before they passed the ADA as part of the protest prior to passing the ADA. That is part of our history. That's pretty darn cool. Oh, thank you. It's a great idea. Thank you. And then we have a question. Well, I went to a technological conference in Lisbon. Thank you. In Lisbon, Portugal. And it was, engineers were in that conference. And I was talking with a lot of the engineers there, and they specialized in accessibility. And I, went from engineer to engineer and interested in their technology. And then I asked if they interacted with the community, and they said, no, I know, I'm the engineer, was their answer. Then I went to the next guy. I said, did you ever interact with the disabled community? And they said, no, I'm a problem solver. I'm an engineer. I asked, did you interact with whatever community you were, developing something about? They said, no, I'm an engineer. I don't have to. I know what I'm doing. So fine. One person, I asked about, they asked if I could read lips. And this guy, had a very magnifier. He had a lip magnifier. And he really thought his two great big lips were going up and down and up and down. And I looked at it and I went, it was pretty scary, actually. It was frightening. And so I asked the guy, did you work with any deaf people? And he said, no. And I've worked with a lot of engineers, in my life. And most of them, the way their minds work, they say, no, I have a problem and I fix it. I'm smart, I can figure stuff out, and I'll work with it until it's fixed. So if the goal is to support, it can't be worked if you don't involve the community. Cochlear implants are fine, but they're just a thing. Politically, the politics behind the cochlear implants in terms of what the policy is, and when it was established, is like that sign language was not involved. But the goal basically was to eradicate sign language. That's the problem. And so the gloves aren't hurting anybody, the sign language gloves, but what is the point of them? Is it to help with communication? Okay. But, well, if you think about the person who needs to wear it,
It just seems backwards because if somebody knows ASL and they put the glove on, that's for translating ASL to somebody who doesn't know it. And it seems that the translation that seems most important is for more people to understand ASL as a language, as opposed to making that more accessible to the community that doesn't know it. So I think the gloves kind of seem a little pointless. But my question was more about, I guess hypothetically, if technology is developed with the consultation of the deaf community, should it be pursued?
I think the best thing is to have deaf engineers involved, right? That would be my goal, or just to have deaf engineers. No more consulting, and work, one person consulting, the other person doing the work, you know what I'm saying? Let the deaf person do it. Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Hello. My name is T.S. I'm thinking that currently I see Deaf History Month, right? We have one, right?
That's right, that's happening right.
It's happening right now? So I see things on Facebook like films, the Burger King chain all of a sudden having sign language, and people who sign, but once the month is over, then that all goes away. So I'll. Okay.
Sorry.
So I'm thinking about how it's Deaf History Month now, and I've been seeing things on Facebook that are like the Burger King is learning to sign, or Lyft is teaching signs to people with deaf drivers, and it's all this support for this month, and then next month it all disappears. Like it's only supportive for these short periods of time, and I see the same thing with the queer community and Pride, where during the month of June it's suddenly like a commodity to help out, and you can earn money off of it, and they support. And I wonder if you think that sort of support is still helpful, or if you think it does more harm than good, because it's just like for this corporate purpose and not actually with the main goal of supporting the community.
I didn't realize it's Deaf History Month. I guess I'm, got to think about this. Every day is Deaf History Month for me. Anyway, I should have, I guess I should, think about deaf history. Here's the thing. When corporate stuff happens, and there's, it's about advertising. No, I'm sorry. Corporate virtue signaling. Virtue signing, thank you. corporate virtue signaling. Thank you, help me out. Anybody can help. Corporate virtue signaling. Got it, thank you. Yeah. March, I think there's so many different special months. Thought that, anyway, I'm lost in terms of which month is what. There's Breast Cancer Awareness Month, there's Black History Month, there's June. That's Pride, okay. June is Pride. So yeah, I mean, again, really, every day, it should be included in everyday encounters. Now, I use Twitter, and I follow, like it's how I kind of keep myself up on things, aware. And many people of color are sort of irritated because they only get jobs like Black folks only work during Black History Month, and maybe they're writers they write many, many things, but then they specifically look at this one thing during that one month. And I think with deaf people, it could be the same thing. To be honest with you, the Burger King fingerspelling, might make my life harder. Because then, it'll take me 20 minutes to try to figure out what he's trying to say instead of just, let me order the damn hamburger. Anyway, as I said, I'm not a nice person, so I have very little patience. So with something like this, every day should be Deaf History Month. Also, we should have queer pride every day. It shouldn't just be limited to 1 month. And if we establish a limited period of time, that means, okay, this is our normal during the month. That's the month that we have to be normal, and the other 11 months we're not. We're back to, off the mean. So anyway, I don't know, yes? Okay, that's my answer then, yes. So Jamie says, thank you. I think we've run out of time. That's all right. We want to thank you, Dr. Henner, for your talk. Out in the hall, we've got some food for fellowship time. Please don't, try to get your food and then come back in the room so we're not all squished in the hallway. Okay, thank you. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you.